On June 13th, 2025, Israel attacked military and Iran.
All right, this is ridiculous. I've got stuff to do. I've got some old pickleball games I wanted to do. If you are Patrick or Chris or Mike or someone that wants to learn about Iran, this is the pickleball for you. I'm literally going to play a podcast because I'm not going to do commentary because I got other stuff to do today. But as a benefit, I'm going to do a podcast on the history of Iran. It's 3 parts, so we'll probably get all our pickleball done. Here you go.
It may ask you to log in, but who were the major leaders from the late 1800s until 1953? When was oil discovered? How did the British and Russians influence Iran? Who was Mohammad Mossadegh, and how did he affect the Iran we know today? We will learn the answers to these questions and many more in today's episode, part 1 of Iran 101, or the last 100-ish years in Iran. Welcome to Wiser World, a podcast for busy people who need a refresher on all things world. Here we explore different regions of the globe, giving you the facts and context you need to think historically about current events. I truly believe that the more we learn about the world, the more we embrace our shared humanity. I'm your host, Ali Roper. Thanks for being here. This episode is brought to you by Yeti. From Little League games to family beach days, so it's been a long time in the making. You know, when I taught school, I was limited by time and number of class periods. I could teach the material in. But one of my favorite things about a podcast is that I can do a lot of the research I never had time to do when I was a teacher. And what I've discovered is that some countries take a longer time to do than others. They each kind of have their own speed and rhythm, and I'm learning that I like to roll with it. Okay, I don't want to wait any longer. Let's go scratch the surface of the last 100 years or so of history in Iran. And as I record this in October 2022, Iran is going through a significant moment. Some are calling it a revolution, others are calling it demonstrations, protests. Either way, Iran is very important to know about right now, and I'll be honest, of all the countries I've covered so far in this podcast, Iran's history has been the most complex for me to dive into. There's a barrier to entry in understanding Iran. It's absolutely fascinating, and I have been totally sucked in, which is why it has taken me so long to get these episodes out. I have specifically designed these episodes for people who are non-historians, non-Iranians, people who have a very little understanding of Iran and want to have a better foundational knowledge of this country. So that is who I have designed these episodes for. So let's jump right in with where Iran is located. Iran is a big country. It's 2.5 times bigger than the state of Texas here in the United States. And if you're looking at a map and you see the Saudi Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, it's just to the right of it. It's located right between Iraq on the west and Afghanistan and Pakistan on the east. But it also has borders with lots of other countries as well. And like I said, Iran is very big, so its climate varies depending on where you are in the country. In the north, winters can be very cold with snow and freezing temps. But in the south, winters are mild, summers are very hot, like hot, over 100 degrees hot. And it generally doesn't rain a lot in Iran, though there are parts closer to the coast that have milder climates. It's mostly mountains and plains and deserts, not a lot of forests. And these plains, as we'll learn, they hold lots of oil, which makes Iran number 4 in the world in terms of oil reserves. It also has a higher elevation than some of its neighbors, so it doesn't get quite as hot as, say, Iraq. Some fun facts: bears and leopards live in Iran, and if you know Persian cooking, you know there's lots of walnuts and citrus fruits, dates, cherries, pomegranate, saffron in their food, and that's because those foods can be grown easily in Iran. Before this land was known to the world as Iran, it was called Persia by most people until about 1935, so not that long ago. In fact, many Iranians or people who live in Iran also consider themselves Persian. So modern Iran, the Iran of today, has many different ethnic and tribal groups of people, but the majority of Iranians can trace their family lineage through Persia. So a person is called Iranian if they are from modern Iran, like as in the country of Iran, the state of Iran, but they also might consider themselves Persian as their cultural heritage. They can be both, or they can be Iranian, but from a different ethnic group, such as Iranian Kurdish. So their ethnicity is Kurdish, but their statehood is Iranian. But as I said, since modern-day Iran is a lot of what the Persian Empire used to be, Persian food or Persian culture is often synonymous with Iranian food and Iranian culture. And the Persian Empire is old, thousands and thousands of years old. I think this is something to be very aware of when speaking with Persians and Iranians. They have immense history as a culture, as a people, and many of them take great pride in that history, and they know it quite well. It's been something that's been very surprising to me, how well the Iranians in my life know their history. So I think it's wrong to talk about Iranian history and not spend a second on the Persian Empire, because that's so rich, that's such a rich part of their heritage. So the Persian Empire began roughly 4,000 years ago when people migrated from Central Asia and India. And Iran derives its name from the Aryans, these people who migrated from that region. And Persia truly unified under a man called Cyrus the Great, close to roughly 600 BC. In fact, Cyrus is the one who named the region Persia, and today he's remembered for his conquests, but also for the relative gentleness with which he treated his subjects. For example, you can read about Cyrus in the Bible, when he allowed the Jews to build a temple in Jerusalem, or you might know the Daniel and the lion's den story from the Bible, and Daniel served King Darius, who was Persian. So this is an ancient place at the same time as the Romans and the Greeks And Persia conquered many places. It became a land of kings. And it had these supreme leaders who were given absolute power, and they were called shahs. So a shah in Iran is another name for a king. And because Iran's geography sat right in the middle of the world's most important trading routes at the time, it was also invaded many times by powerful outsiders. And we're not going to go into the Persian Empire in these episodes, but what I think is most important for you to know and keep in mind, stow that away in your brain, is that Iran's history is very old. And from a cultural perspective, Persia has some ancient and beautiful traditions that have absolutely affected the Western world at large. In fact, many of the most prominent political philosophies and ideologies studied today originated in Persia. Like Persian poetry is world famous. You might know the 13th century poet Rumi, widely read today by people all over the world. And these are many things that make Iran very unique compared to some of its neighbors, especially Middle Eastern countries. During the age of imperialism, when European nations were conquering lands other than their own, mostly for influence and economic gains, the Middle East, like much of the world, especially Africa, was part of this. And this carving up of the Middle East into countries was done really without much regard to who lived there, and these areas are still affected today by those decisions. Iran, however, was kind of the exception. It's the one country in the region that has pretty similar borders to pre-imperial, pre-colonial times. Not perfectly the same, but pretty close. And this is important because Iran is very different from its neighbors. Persians are not the same as Arabs. Their ethnic heritage is more Indo-European. They speak a language called Farsi, also known as Persian, and you contrast that with Arabic, which is an Afro-Asiatic language. They're quite different. And Persians make up roughly 60% of Iran's population. The other majority belongs to Turks. And Arabs really only make 3 to 7% of the population in Iran. So that's just good to know. Iran has quite a few minority groups, such as the Jews and the Baharis, among others. But it's just important to note, Iran is different from its neighbors. And another distinction is that the majority of Iranians are Shia Muslims, also sometimes known Shiite, but I'm going to say Shia. The majority of the Muslim world is Sunni Muslim. And I want to give a little background on that because the distinction is very important in the history. So let's do a really brief, super brief intro to the religion of Islam here. Islam was founded in 610 AD by the Prophet Muhammad in Saudi Arabia. And it is one of the 3 major religions around today that originate in the Middle East, Christianity and Judaism being the other 2. And it's the second most popular religion in the world behind Christianity. The religion of Islam spread throughout the region, the Middle Eastern region, through trade and commerce and war and conquest. And in roughly 650 AD, Islam was brought to Iran by conquest. So as one author put it, quote, by the time the Arab conquest arrived, Persians already had long experience in assimilating foreign cultures, and whenever they did so, they shaped those cultures to their liking or took certain parts while resisting others. So it was when they were forced to adopt Islam. They had no choice but to accept Muhammad as God's prophet and the Quran, that's a holy book for Muslims, as God's word, but over a period of centuries, they fashioned an interpretation of Islam quite different from that of their Arab conquerors, end quote. So to illustrate this different interpretation that Iranians took, in Islam there are 2 major groups, I would say. When the Prophet Muhammad died, there was a divide on who should be the next leader. Should it be a blood relative of Muhammad, or should it be one of his most trusted advisors? And the majority of the people, about 90% of Muslims, followed his trusted advisor. And these Muslims today are called Sunni Muslims. And the minority group that believed Muhammad's blood relative should lead out, which is roughly 10% of the Muslims today, are called Shia Muslims. And because the Shias interpreted the history differently than the Sunnis, the effect was that long-standing Iranian beliefs could be reinforced by this unique take on Islam. And the majority of Shia Muslims today live in Iran, another distinction between the rest of the Middle Eastern Arab world. Again, I have simplified this way down, but what I basically want you to understand is that grouping Iran into the Middle East does not mean it can be easily grouped into the Arab world culturally or ethnically. The majority of Iranians believe in Islam, but follow a different sect than the majority Sunni majority, and Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims don't always get along, especially politically. Plus, Iranians have a different language than the majority of Arabs. They physically appear differently as well, tend to have lighter colored skin. So we're studying a country here who has situated itself quite differently ethnically, religiously, politically than other Middle Eastern countries. So that's the background. Let's get into the history. We always start these episodes with the late 1800s, and so far, the countries we've talked about, every single one of them has had some kind of colonialism or imperialism. Same with Iran. Like I said, the late 1800s is the time when European nations are wanting to grow empires, take over lands to have more resources. And at this time, Persia was run by a Shah, and he was pretty much an absolute ruler. Where we're going to begin in the late 1800s, the Shahs were known for their excessive lifestyle, huge national treasury, and the Shah at this time had 1,600 wives. And he was quite the guy. He demanded to be called the Shah of Shahs. He lived this very wealthy lifestyle. And he began selling government jobs and concessions to Europeans. And the British were his first customers. Russia also had a stake, Russia and Great Britain. The Iranians started to get very agitated as they watched their nation's most valuable assets and lands and waterways and rights to establish banks, things like that. All of these important things in a country were passed from Iranians to foreigners who could pay a higher price than the Iranians. And a lot of Iranians were living in poverty while the Shah was swimming in money from the British and the Russians, and there was this rising discontent in the country. For example, in 1891, the Shah sold the Iranian tobacco industry to the British. And under the agreement, every farmer who grew tobacco was required to sell it to this particular British company, and every smoker had to buy it at a shop that was part of this British imperial network. And as a nation of smokers and thousands of farmers who grew it, they were pretty mad that the foreigners were gaining so much from their work. And personally, I can understand that. I think that would be very frustrating. And religious leaders...
How about that, folks? Those crazy Persians. They got a Shah that's just given away their country's assets for their own personal gain, leaving some of their own citizens pissed off and poor. Don't like hearing that. How's the pickleball going, guys? We'll get right back to it. By the way, this is Wiser Worlds, the podcast. She gives a general short overview of many different countries. So if you want to learn yourself a little bit about the world around you, especially as events in the world kind of put them on your frontal cortex, Wiser World's a good choice. This thing she redid because of the upheaval between Iran and Israel. Look at me hitting the fancy dead drop. Chris, where are you going? You belong over there, big guy. All right, you troglodytes, you're learning stuff today.
And to get involved. Finally, the Shah's wives, all 1,600 of them, protested by stopping smoking. The Shah was so thrown off, he had to cancel the deal. And even though a lot of the country's assets were still dominated by foreigners, there was still tons of unemployment and inflation and serious food shortages, the Iranians felt emboldened by their success to influence the Shah, and this is an important moment in history. It was kind of the first modern take of, hey, we can influence the Shah here. And in 1896, he was shot. Very few people were upset about it. His country was dominated by foreigners, horrible situations for people, and his son was no better at ruling than he was. And in 1901, he sold to the British the exclusive rights to, quote, obtain, exploit, develop, render suitable for trade, carry away, and sell natural gas and petroleum for a term of 60 years, end of quote. Okay, this one deal changed the future of Iran forever. So what did he just sell away? He sold away the rights to basically obtain and sell natural gas and petroleum in Iran for 60 years. In 1905, there were so many riots and protests for...
Gave the industry away. The oil industry. Gave it to British. Eventually became the company we know today as British Petroleum. Geopolitics at its finest.
Democracy, that this new Shah had no choice but to create a parliament so that there would be some representation of the public in the government. And it took a long time to do it, and the Iranians took to the streets and they demanded representation. They really had to fight for it. This time in history is called the Constitutional Revolution of 1906 in Iran. A constitution was made that laid out the rights and privileges of all Iranians, and then a parliament was put into place, and it was called the Majlis or the Majlis. This is a huge deal for Iran. They basically had a democratic revolution, still had a Shah, but also now had the Majlis or the parliament now. And the Majlis is basically the legislative body of politicians who would work with the Shah to make laws and rule over Iran. They could help kind of curb this unchecked power of the Shah. And at the time, some members of the Majlis were directly elected, others were chosen by guilds like grocers or blacksmiths. But the first session was at the end of 1906. It was a pretty tough transition. As we know, democratization is a long process. And plus, to make matters more difficult, the Shah died shortly after, and his son, Muhammad Ali, he hated the Majlis and wouldn't listen to them, and he destroys the parliament building, declares war on the revolutionaries, and a civil war ensues. And to make it short, the Shah wins. When you hear Lululemon, you probably think to and hit play. Any of these leaders stood with the Shah, who hated the Majlis, fought against democratization. So for 5 years, the country was in total turmoil. The Majlis was shut down. And the thing that's important to know, though, is that a constitution had been written and adopted. And so this gave people the feeling that, hey, we have made some progress here. And it gave people conviction that they had rights that no government could take away from them. And this would influence Iran for many, many years, even today. And during this time, a lot was going on with the foreign powers as well. I kind of see it as Iran fighting amongst itself, but Britain and Russia are like the big dogs on the scene. They have other plans. And in 1907, Britain and Russia signed a treaty kind of dividing Iran between the two of them. Britain took control of the south, Russia took control of the north, and then there was a neutral strip between them that Iranians could rule as long as they behaved, right? Iran was not consulted on this, they were just told this, and it wasn't that the Shah didn't have power, he did, but those areas were also hugely influenced by Britain and Russia. Now here's the big stuff. Oil was discovered in Iran in 1908. Right away, everyone knew this was a huge deal. Iran is basically floating on oil. The British very quickly formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and the British government gained direct control of the Iranian oil industry. If you look at this from the British perspective, This was a gold mine. In fact, Winston Churchill called it a, quote, a prize.
That is the ball game. What I saw there, which was very little, I thought we played okay. And I'm learning about world history. It's just, what a gift life is.